What if I told you the part of you that's ruining your relationships, killing your confidence, and repeating the same old patterns isn't a flaw? It's a ghost in your mind you've never dared to face. Carl Jung called it the shadow. And unless you face it, it will keep writing the script of your life while you mistake it for destiny. Think of it this way. Meeting yourself is the most important thing you can do, but it's never easy. It's like the first meeting with your shadow self, a concept introduced by Carl Jung. The shadow is a narrow door, a tight passage. No one escapes the painful constriction that comes from descending into the deep well of their own soul. Maybe even all those repressed fears, traumas, biases, and untapped potential are all lurking in the dark part of your mind. You see, we are all limited by how much we are unaware of. When we're unaware of them, we're all limited to the point of being puppets of our shadow selves. It's that part of our psyche, the unconscious, that influences our thoughts and actions every single day. This dark, unconscious part of the psyche, what Carl Jung famously called the shadow, is one of the most enduring aspects of his philosophical legacy. It's also deeply misunderstood and hard to translate into actionable steps. Like, if I told you right now, hey, do some shadow work, you'd be like, what exactly do you do? It's a riddle. It's like a Zen koan. How do you work on something you're not conscious of? The good news is, it can be done. And it's vitally important for understanding the human condition. It's for knowing who you are, healing the deep wounds, and reaching your untapped potential. Or as Jung preferred to put it, reaching a kind of psychological wholeness. So grab your metaphorical hard hats, because we're going on an expedition into the unknown territories of your mind. We're going to shine a light on the shadow, explore it from all angles, and figure out how to actually work with it. 1. What is the shadow? Okay, let's break it down. In the simplest terms, the shadow is the dark side of our psyche that we're not aware of. It's that unconscious place where biases, traumas, unhealed wounds, and surprise, great potential are all hanging out. As with most of Jung's musings, it can be difficult to pin down an exact definition of the shadow. But this passage from the great Jungian analyst Robert Johnson hits a lot of the key points and sums it up quite nicely. The shadow is the sum total of all unpleasant qualities we would like to hide from ourselves and others. Cowardice, laziness, selfishness, greed, and so forth. It represents the dark side of the ego, the aspect of ourselves we fear acknowledging. But denying the shadow doesn't make it disappear. It only gives it more power to quietly dictate our lives. Now, here's the kicker, and it's crucial. The shadow isn't all bad. It's not just a repository for negative stuff. I've even spoken with several psychologists and therapists of a Jungian persuasion that don't actually like the term shadow very much because it is so inherently dark. But on the point of the shadow not being entirely negative, here's a musing from psychologist James Hillman. To know one's own shadow is to be at home in the darkness of the self, which is where creativity and hidden treasures are stored. Think of it like this. A hero who ventures into a dark forest might face terrifying monsters, but they might also find allies, discover hidden treasures, and ultimately find their true purpose. It's in that darkness that growth happens. 2. The road less traveled. Theoretically, it sounds like a romantic adventure, right? But in reality, it's anything but practical. It requires going off life's well-worn paths. As Jung puts that, we instinctively resist trying, the way that leads through obscurity and darkness. We wish to hear only of unequivocal results, and completely forget that these results can only be brought about when we have ventured into and emerged again from the darkness. This way of obscurity and darkness without sure results. This is the shadow. This is the unknown psychic territory we have to find a way to traverse. if we want real growth, healing, that wholeness that Jung always talks about. In this quote, Jung is trying to illustrate that there is no shortcut for this, that there is no replacement for personally, perhaps painfully diving deeply into the dark parts of your own mind. 3. Why bother? What's the point? Okay, so why would anyone willingly do this? Why put ourselves through all of this? Well, the answer is transformative. I mean, imagine being free of, or more realistically, less, under the influence of all of these unseen forces in your mind. Imagine seeing through your biases, healing your weaknesses, and finding hidden strengths. Imagine how it would enhance your confidence and how healing it can be. In a way, this is seeing through the matrix, the real matrix, the matrix of the limitations of your mind. Doing shadow work is an indispensable part of reaching this place of clarity. But here's the thing, the goal isn't conventional success. In fact, it may lead you far away from what society typically defines as success. In fact, this work may well lead you off the well-worn path like I alluded to before, and in the short term, that's not going to be good for your Robinhood account. As I know personally, I've heard numerous stories from people I know. Guests on the podcast stories about quitting jobs, or people who greatly diverted from their careers to do serious, deep internal self-work, because they felt like any hoops they were jumping through, any career achievements were ultimately empty, were not satisfying something deep down in their souls. The what's in it for me answer, I think, is simple. It's for your soul. This is the soul-discovering work of becoming who you really are, understanding who you really are, and becoming a little bit more whole. In fact, shadow work is one of the most essential paths toward true spiritual growth. Not the kind you read in self-help memes, but the kind that reshapes your inner world from the ground up. There's a line from the Red Book Jung's personal writing that always stuck with me. We should grow like a tree that likewise does not know its law. We tie ourselves up with intentions, not mindful of the fact that intention is the limitation. Like a great tree, Jung suspected that we all had a complex, unique, massive potential, but discovering that form requires following our own law, as he puts it, our own way, shutting out the influence from the outside world again, avoiding the well-worn path, avoiding other people's expectations of us. The first major part of achieving this grand, unique potential that all of us has is exactly what we're talking about. It is discovering and integrating the shadow. And again, if we can move deeper into our own psyches, into those dark territories, we'll have a more complete understanding of our strengths, our biases, our weaknesses, and our limitations. Think of all the unconscious patterns that we're playing out. You probably catch yourself just doing something out of habituation, or you catch yourself procrastinating when there's no reason for you to do so. It's likely that all of these recursive behavior patterns are emanating from our shadows. Also, we'll be less susceptible to projecting our shadow material out onto the world and out onto other people, which if you take a step back and consider how much of that is going on in the world, how much of the world's problems stem from this unconscious projection of our shadow material, how much blaming, being triggered, broad brushing, whole groups of people, scapegoating. This is all shadow projection, and it's one of the deepest psychic sicknesses there is. Now that we're talking more in the macro, Jung also points out that the shadow is not only a personal phenomenon, it's a collective phenomenon. So there is a collective shadow of humanity. There's a shadow of nations. We see the collective shadow in the shadows of nations spilling over, in the toxic discourse, in the atrocities of war. So this concept, as with most of Jung's concepts, applies both in the individual and in the collective. 4. Getting practical. How to do shadow work. Okay, enough theory. How do we actually do this? Well, here are a few techniques that I've found helpful drawing from Jung, other experts, and my own experiences. Commit to curiosity. The first prerequisite is really a mindset, a commitment to get curious, to get earnest about your own mind, to normalize investigating your own thoughts and behaviors. So what this practically means is every time you feel an urge to push something down, to have an emotional outburst, to get triggered, to play out a familiar pattern that might be damaging you, have to resolve to be mindful in these moments. Strive to be aware when these things happen and try to trace these behaviors back to their root. Active imagination. One of the principal tools that Jung used in his analytical practice in general, but also in shadow work, is active imagination. This is a technique that involves engaging with the unconscious, trying to navigate the unconscious through the use of imagery, symbol, and visualization. So a therapist trained in this will guide you and give you prompts so that the unconscious ends up expressing itself, and you're more able to catch the unconscious expressing itself in ways that you would be unable to on your own. Of course, a good therapist trained in this is also going to take you to places that are uncomfortable. They're going to encourage you to express that shadow material in a setting that's free of judgment or censorship. And over time, this process reveals what's been buried in your unconscious. You might ask, though, where do these hidden images and impulses even come from? What are these images you focus on? Dream work. Jung, and of course, men. Many therapists believe that dreams contain important information stemming from the unconscious, including information about and from the shadow. Jungian dream analysis, similar to active imagination, involves focusing in on these dream images, exploring symbols, motifs, and themes in a dream to get to the bottom of that unconscious or shadow material. Journaling. Capturing this information, and you do this most regularly in a journal. So this method is about journaling, and this includes dream journaling for sure. In fact, if you're doing any kind of work with a Jungian therapist or a therapist trained in this method, or you're just trying to follow kind of the methods of Jung in general, you're definitely going to want to keep a dream journal because you need to capture these dream images. You need to capture these transmissions from the unconscious. Reverse engineering, projection. Reverse engineering, projection. Again, projection is essentially the manifestation of shadow material, the projection of shadow material onto other people. So this method would involve writing down or reflecting on times that people have triggered you, angered you, and trying to get back to the root of that, like I talked about before, but doing it in a more formal way. Honestly, reflect on what it is about that person that made you angry. Where does that trace back to? Take note of the qualities in others that trigger you. Then ask yourself, could those traits exist somewhere in you too? Meditation. The reason I believe this is definitely effective when it comes to shadow work is because it helps us cultivate a kind of clarity in our minds in general. It allows us to become more attuned to our inner world so that we can get a little bit of a clearer view of the unconscious parts of the mind. Plant medicines. Optional with caution. I really believe work with plant medicines' visual molecules can be incredibly important in this department as well. I mean, there's a reason the word psychedelic directly translates to mind manifesting, because that's what it does. It brings parts of your mind to the forefront that you're often not conscious of. It brings to the forefront things you want to forget about it. Brings to the forefront things you regret, things you take for granted, among many, many other things. Now let's remember that this is not an exact science, and Jung himself really echoed that sentiment. Quote, "There's generally no effective technique for assimilating the shadow. It is more like diplomacy or statesmanship. Also, this is not something where you're ever done. You've never fully integrated the shadow or the unconscious, or let alone completed the individuation process. But real progress can absolutely be made. Again, all this can be confusing and painful in the short term, but it is worth it. This will yield, like I said before, real growth, real healing, real power. There are so many places we could go from here. We could go to synchronicity, which I've already done. We could go to archetypes. We could go deeper into the individuation process. We could get into Jung's obsession with alchemy and how that beautifully maps over human psychological development and self-discovery in general. The journey into the shadow is not for the faint of heart, but for those who dare. It reveals a strength the surface world could never give. If this lit a flame in you, let it burn brighter. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, or pass it to someone standing at the edge of their own darkness. Your voice in this space is not just welcome, it's sacred. Stay brave, stay curious, and always, always walk toward the light, even if your first steps are taken blindfolded.